President Cyril Ramaphosa says that poor service delivery is a violation of basic human rights. He made the comments at an official Human Rights Day event held in the Northern Cape today. The President has urged public servants to put people first.
All our people must be well served because, you know, today is Human Rights Day. Just these services, and I do want everyone who works to serve our people must know that when we don't do our work, we are violating the human rights of our people. If you don't serve our people well, whether it's in a clinic, whether it's in a hospital, whether it's in a municipality, if you don't serve our people well, you are violating their human rights. And if you don't serve them with a measure of joy, if you don't serve them with a measure of dignity and respect, you are violating their human rights.
Let's talk about how the country is doing in upholding the Bill of Rights. Let's bring in Deputy Justice Minister John Jeffery, as well as Newzroom Afrika Politics editor Lukhanyo Calata, who's with me in studio. Deputy Minister, good evening. I'll start with you. The President talks about how failure to deliver basic services is a human rights violation. Quite an admission when you consider that government is the main offender.
No, sure. There have been, let's put it this way, particularly when it comes to socio-economic rights, there have been big advances since the advent of democracy, but there's still a lot more that can be done. There's a lot of areas where service delivery can improve. The President spoke specifically about access to healthcare. More people have access to healthcare, but conditions at many of the hospitals and the clinics are by nowhere near what they should be. So it is something that is a problem.
How do we deal with it? Because we've all spoken about what the problem is, but years on, this situation persists. I mean, in some areas, people say it's getting worse.
Well, I think there have been comments or there have been debates around were things better under apartheid, and that, quite frankly, is absurd because things have improved significantly since then with regard to all the rights, not just the political rights, but also social security, access to health care, those kinds of things. So, but there are obviously ongoing challenges, and government needs to work harder at ensuring those challenges are overcome, and also the public, the voters, should hold them accountable.
Let's bring in our politics editor, Lukhanyo Calata, in studio. The Minister talks about work that's being done to address issues around rights, but as reflected in much of our coverage today, people are wondering if a day like this has any meaning for them beyond the historic significance.
Yeah, and I think, Thembekile, the first place for us to start is we look at the package that was put together by our reporter in KZN, Nobuhle, where this community was relocated 13 years ago, 14 years ago, told that after the World Cup, you know what I mean, we're going to build you houses, you will be relocated, and it's going to be so much better. They still continue to live in that informal settlement. They live in abject squalor. Now, that is the ANC's responsibility as a government, because who else do we then hold accountable for the continued conditions that those people find themselves under, if not for the government of the African National Congress in KwaZulu-Natal, as well as nationally, for continuing to allow that community, as just an example, to continue to live in that kind of squalor. So, yes, the Deputy Minister, John Jeffery, makes a point that within the statutes books, South Africa is much better today than it was under apartheid. But for some people, their actual lived experiences remain exactly the same.
And it's interesting because when you look at the historic significance itself, this day was when black people were killed fighting for their rights, and when you look at the people who in this country get the shorter end of the raw deal in terms of human rights in South Africa, it is still mainly the black and poor majority.
And isn't it worse this time around, Thembekile, when you consider that now it's by a government that's elected by the people, a government that has faces like you and I in the majority, black people that are sitting in these offices, making these decisions that are supposed to be keeping the oversight over, their departments and all of those, and making sure that the black people that were at the short end of the stick under apartheid, are now being brought to a level where, you know what I mean, where they can actually enjoy their human rights as enshrined in the Constitution. I think it's even worse when it's done by a black government against black people.
Deputy Minister John Jeffery, you were listening to our our politics editor, Lukhanyo Calata. They're talking about the situation in KZN, people in Sipingo who are saying they were moved for developments before 2010. The World Cup was coming along, and I was making the point that when you look at the significance of the day, we're basically marking the sacrifices of people, black people, who marched basically for a better South Africa, right? Years on, there is still very much a skewed racial imbalance when you look at who is unable to access basic rights and even justice. How do we go beyond platitudes from government?
Well, we don't live in a perfect world. We don't live in a perfect society. We've got a lot that needs to be done. Unfortunately, you've ambushed me a bit on the Isipingo issue. I wasn't aware of it, only heard of snippets of the item on the news bulletin. So I need to go in and will go into what is happening there. But look, I mean, the issue is we have this Bill of Rights and it is enforceable, and it's the courts that enforce. Yes, poorer people do not have the money to go to court, but they can get support from legal aid, which is state funded, for example. There's issues when the right to equality is infringed, that every magistrate's court, every high court, and every regional court is an equality court, so they can go there to bring the case against the person that they feel has violated their rights to equality. So there basically are things like that. There's an extension of basically, I would see it as access to justice, building more courts in more remote areas, whilst at the same time trying to ensure that the services in the urban areas where there's a greater influx of people, that those continue to be given. But there's no denying that there is a lot still to be done.
And you've highlighted, for example, recourse through the courts, right? And yes, there's legal aid and all of that available, but people say they feel discouraged often to take those routes because even when you've gone that route and are seeking assistance, it just takes too long. 2, 3, 4 years later, in some cases, people say they're still waiting to see justice and the state or whoever has violated their rights being held responsible.
Well, things can take, it varies how long it takes. Court cases take, it depends on the complexity of the case. And then it also depends on whether there's an appeal or a review of the earlier judgment. So yes, it does. And I always think that things take much longer than they should. And that's a challenge to government to work harder in terms of ensuring that there's faster delivery and better delivery.
And just on some of the other issues around rights in this country, you're not allowed to discriminate against anyone. You've just been seized as a department with dealing with issues around the hate crimes bill. It faced a lot of opposition, it must be said. You've now managed to get it through. Just on the issue of racial discrimination and hate crimes overall, are we regressing as a country?
That's a difficult question to answer in terms of, and just to say that the bill's been passed by the National Assembly. It's now with the National Council of Provinces for concurrence. There was a lot of support from the bill. The opposition was basically the Democratic Alliance, the Freedom Front Plus, the ACDP, and Al Jama. But you can probably see that it's where the concerns with the bill are. But in terms of, I mean, our nation building project, our social cohesion has got a long way to go. Obviously, the state of the economy, the high levels of inequality, which are basically racially based, do mean that there are greater divisions, or there are still great divisions in our society. And again, it's something that we've got to work at, but also we need society as a whole to work at it, particularly the advantaged and the privileged people.
Lukhanyo, let me bring you back into the conversation. The Deputy Minister referenced social cohesion. To what extent has that been challenged, I wonder, especially in recent years?
Have we actually ever had social cohesion in South Africa? When you consider, obviously, that at the beginning, of 1994, going into 96, particularly with the TRC, one of the things that was championed by former Archbishop Emeritus, Archbishop Desmond Tutu, was this notion of a rainbow nation. Yes, it was said and it was spoken about quite loudly, but were we ever a society that was cohesive? Instead, what we've seen happening post-1994 is that our society has become more unequal. We're now the most unequal society in the world. That means that the rich people in South Africa got richer. The poor people in South Africa got poorer. Now, in South Africa, the issue of rich and poor has always been centered around the issue of race. So we would then say that the white people got richer and then the black people got poorer, which tells you that there was never a moment in this country where we were cohesive, where we were functioning as a united society. Never mind this grand notion of a rainbow nation, but the actual reality on the ground was that white people were growing and becoming richer on their own, while black people were stagnating or even moving further back in terms of poverty and all of those things on their own.
Deputy Minister, where did we come off the tracks, if you will, as a country, in terms of social cohesion, access to justice and a better life for all, as per what was envisioned in the Constitution and the Bill of Rights?
Yeah, let me just also respond to Lukhanyo. I mean, obviously, we've never been socially cohesive as a nation. We were divided racially under apartheid, and part of apartheid was also ethnic divisions. So there was sort of basically a large number of groups in South Africa. I think we had post-94 the possibility of greater social cohesion. We've had moments, the Rugby World Cup, the first one, the soccer, the African Cup of Nations in the 90s. I mean, sport tends to bring people together, but yes, it is correct that the moments that we've had that we could have made more advances on social cohesion, I think in many instances things have gone backward. And as Lukhanyo says, it is, well, we have had the growth of a black middle class. So that has been quite extensive. But there's still huge disparities between the rich and the poor, and the rich. I mean, white people are generally rich or don't have many poor people. There are poor whites, but there are not that percentage-wise of the total white population as many as black people. But the issues are, there has been, I think, greater service delivery. Obviously, things like urban migration of people migrating from the rural areas, which they were not able to do before, to the urban areas, does increase the pressure on government services, whether it's housing, whether it's schools, whether it's clinics. There's been large numbers of schools that have been built. The President referred in his Human Rights Day speech to the increase in the number of tertiary education students funded by NSFAS, but also acknowledged that there were concerns that need to be addressed in terms of the current problems on many of our campuses. So there's advances. We're going forward, I think, but we also need to do more. On the issue of access to justice, I would say that things have improved in terms of more courts, more access in terms of the rationalization of those courts, greater jurisdiction. A minor thing like, for example, that now at any regional court you can get, that regional court is a divorce court. You can get divorced there. You don't have to go to the high courts for a divorce. Issues of small claims courts, which now are in every magisterial district. They were only in 94. They were only in a few areas, basically white areas. So those are some of the examples. The rollout of legal aid has been quite extensive. So those are some of the issues of I think, greater access to human rights.
Lukhanyo, as we conclude then, you look at socioeconomic conditions, the political, race relations, diversity. What needs to happen at this point to get things right?
A lot. I do, Thembekile, think that as a country, we need to make a deliberate decision. Both black, white, colored, Indian, Chinese, everybody that lives in our country, we need to make a deliberate decision to say that we are actually now going to build our country. And the first things that we need to do is that it is my opinion that we need to sit around many tables and town halls and city halls and we just need to listen as a start to one another. White people need to understand who and what we are as black people, and then we need to give them the opportunity to explain to us who and what they are, right? And then I think once there's an understanding between the various races of who we are, and then we all take a collective decision that we will build our country, not just for us, but for our children and the generations to come. Because right now, we're all acting very much in silos, and we are not talking to one another as a country, as a people. And I think that is our downfall, because we simply are not on the same page as a people in this country.
Lukhanyo Calata, Newzroom Afrika Politics editor, Deputy Minister John Jeffery, Deputy Minister for Justice. Good to have your time, gentlemen. Thank you.